Hello everyone and welcome to yet another Fun Fact Friday here at the Crockett Tavern Museum in Morristown, Tennessee. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing something that historians commonly refer to as the plastic of the 18th century. But as you've probably already guessed by the display in front of me, we're going to be discussing horn. Now, since the beginning of mankind, humans have had a propensity for using a variety of materials to build things, craft items, and do whatever it took to stay alive and stay ahead of the game. Now, with that being said, horn was obviously no exception. And we can see in archaeological excavations that horn was being used for thousands and thousands of years. Take, for example, the oldest drinking horn ever found, which was in a Scythian burial site dating back to the 7th century BC. However, the majority of the horn excavations and finds are typically dated back to around the medieval period to the 19th century, when horn began to be phased out in lieu of other materials. But it should be noted that the reason for the rare archaeological finds when it comes to horn items is largely owed to the fact of the matter, like many items before the 1900s, they were organic, and horn, well, like other things, could decay fairly easily and fairly quickly if not properly maintained. But nonetheless, the fellow who's going to be working with all this horn is quite simply named a horner. And his job is going to be hot and smelly, to say the least. This, of course, is largely owing to the fact of the matter that he would set up his shop near butcher shops and slaughterhouses in order to get ease of access to materials. But good news for him, despite the smelly aspect of things, is that horn was relatively inexpensive, and therefore he could purchase massive amounts of this product and then in turn crank out a variety of beautiful yet sturdy items and ensure that he was going to make a profit. So what might one find in a horner's shop? Well, you could find eating utensils, bowls, cups, combs, cufflinks, buttons, you name it. In fact, the majority of the items that were in the horner's shop were only limited to his imagination and enterprise, but trust me when I say that they could be as varied as the color and sizes of horns that he was working with. Interestingly enough, however, it is probably one of the most quintessential frontier items that was not made in a horner's shop, and that is, well, the powder horn. You see, powder horns, like most of the other equipment and accoutrements that were used on the frontier, were made by the frontiersmen themselves per their own specifications and their own likings. Now, in some cases, we see that powder horns could be quite fanciful with beautiful stop plugs and back plugs, and have lovely scrimshaw and etchings put into the horn. But in most cases, the horn tended to be a very simple item, such as what you see here. Now, this is because a lot of the frontiersmen, they didn't go in for all the frills which money could buy. But now, we do see somewhat of an exception to this rule, to a certain degree, and that is at the Tennessee State History Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, wherein on display there you'll see a lovely powder horn made out of an ox horn that was gifted to David Crockett by the Whig Party of Philadelphia as sort of a political prank. Now, although this horn is rather fanciful and ornate, well, David Crockett, like many other frontiersmen, he preferred the simpler things, as is evidenced in this iconic portrait behind me, which was done of David Crockett in 1834. Now, before the people in the comments try and crucify me by saying, oh, well, that's not his actual clothing nor his accoutrements, yes, we know. But we also see that when David Crockett and the artist John Chapman were getting together to put this painting together, that they took at least about 2 weeks going throughout Washington town and nearby to gather the appropriate costume and accoutrements, including the rifle, which David Crockett said most closely resembled what he wore when out hunting bear in the cane. So as you can see, Crockett preferred the simpler things. But nonetheless, we see that working with horn was a hot, smelly job. Not unlike working with plastic today, because if you've ever cut PVC pipe, then you know it kind of has a weird smell to it. Well, powder horn's the same thing. But interestingly enough, we also see some comparison and contrast when it comes to working with plastics and PVC and horn, and that is when it comes time to making the plastic soft and pliable so you can bend it, mold it, or shape it. Well, of course, today you're going to be using a heat gun. But the same principle applies to using cow horn, except in this case, what we're heating the horn with is either hot oil or fire. So suffice it to say, because of that, and the fact of the matter that at one point horn was so versatile and used on a daily basis like plastics are today, that historians started sitting around scratching their whiskers and thinking, well, it's only natural that we give it the nickname of plastic of the 18th century. But by the 1920s, well, the horners could read the writing on the wall, and they started wisely investing in the plastics industry. And at that point, because plastics started to rise, horn items started to become expensive luxury items, whereas plastic became commonplace, everyday use type of things. But in the 1970s, a movie named Jeremiah Johnson came out, and it saw the revitalization and resurgence of frontier reenacting and frontier equipment being made. So with the help of such movies like Jeremiah Johnson, The Mountain Men, and so on and so forth, we see that the frontier reenacting comes back into pop culture, and so do the accoutrements. Of course, you have your muzzleloading rifle, your knife and tomahawk, as well as the powder horn. Well, folks, that concludes today's Fun Fact Friday episode here at the Crockett Tavern Museum, and we want to thank you all so much for joining along as we explore what life was like in the 18th and 19th century. For those of you who've been following along on Facebook and YouTube, we continually want to thank you for your support, but of course, the best means of support is by coming out to the Crockett Tavern Museum to pay us a visit. Now, as always, a description will be attached to the video, and we'll have our hours of operations as well as admissions listed there as well. But until next week, this is Isaac White signing off, saying goodbye and God bless.